That's it? We get started? Okay, welcome everyone. Uh, it's my real pleasure to chair this session, which is going to be fantastic. The title of this session is Food for Thought, Gastronomy, and Literature. So, in a sense, this is about food, which is what goes in, and talk, that's what comes out. In fact, it's the talk and the writing that makes food, in that sense, taste social. And there was a 18th century Hispanic nun and writer, Sor Inez Juana de la Cruz, who wrote, and that will set the theme of today's panel. I quote, if Aristotle had cooked, he would have written a great deal more, end quote. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do today is we'll start off with a couple of broad questions and then specific to each of the authors here. We will pose questions. We'll go for about 45 minutes, that's right, and then about 15 minutes of Q&A. Some of us have to run to the next panel, so we'll have to be a little tight on the time. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Such an esteemed panel. So all of you are known for your writing and your cooking, some more than others. So maybe I'll start with Ms. Jaffrey. What do you think is the difference in the art of writing and the art of cooking for you? You have done both extensively, talked about it, and written, by my count, 15 extraordinary books and more. So for you, what is the difference in terms of the way you write, the art of writing, and the art of cooking?
They're such different things. I don't even know where to begin. Cooking is a practical matter. You take things that are given to you, or you choose, or you select, and you put them together in a certain order that comes partly from learning, partly intuitively, partly from memory and taste and smell, and you put them in a certain order to create an alchemy, in my case, of things and tastes that I am dying to eat myself. So it is a pleasurable future that I'm creating for myself. And as I put these things that come, as I said, from memory, from practice, from the way the hand moves, I am creating what I want. Now, the writing of it is then my effort to explain what it is that I have done. And then I have to draw on my memory of what I've done and attach it to time, place, past, future. Because while I'm making the things that I'm making, I'm also producing a memory for myself, or creating a memory from a memory, and putting it all down and then placing it somewhere that other people will understand exactly what I have done, what my experience has been, and part of it is cultural, part of it is texture, part of it is place, memory, putting it all down that I'm creating for the person who's going to read my book exactly what I'm experiencing and the memories that led to my creating what I'm creating. I feel that, as we all say, food doesn't exist in a vacuum. So you're trying to tell people why you created this and what in the background of what you created is so important to you that I'm having then an experience which I can share that experience with you in some way by telling you about every aspect of it, tactile or from memory or whatever, that I'm having as I write, as I cook and write and eat. I want to let you know the heart of my experience. Does that answer?
That's beautiful. And I was going to ask you, have you had kind of a good example of a failed communication in that process of writing about the cooking and the context and the moment? For instance, I remember in your early writing, you were very resistant to use curry.
Yes.
Right? And you said, that's the last word I'm going to use. And eventually you came around to using curry. So is that in some ways this kind of a dialogue between what you were doing and what you were trying to explain and the recipients?
It's more than a dialogue. It's admitting defeat.
Okay.
in my case, because I started as a purist.
Yes.
I said, as an Indian, I insisted there's no such thing as curry. Forget that word, don't ever use it, because no Indian will understand what you're saying. You're generalizing something that they are so particular about. There are different ways of, you add one masala, two masalas, three, and each time it's different for them and it's creating another experience. And then somebody comes along and said, oh, you eat curry. And that sort of kills the individuality of each dish that you have in a different part of the country, even in your own house. Mm-hmm. So I actually resisted for about 20, 30, 40 years. And then it was just, every editor would say, can you do a book of curries? Every question, curries. I said, okay. I will just give up and accept it as a word in the English language. And if everybody understands whatever they understand by it, let it go. I'm not going to fight it anymore.
Fantastic.
But one other thing I want to say is that another thing that happens is when you're cooking, you fail many times. And I have to tell you, I'm trying to make, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the rasgulla, which is and my kids used to call it the squeaky dessert, because it squeaks sometimes. And it's a kind of cheese that's made into a ball. First you make the cheese, then you make the ball, then you throw it into a syrup and you cook it in the syrup. It fails so many times, that you feel that you can't share anything with anyone, for you can't even get it right. So these things can happen, and they're totally unsuccessful efforts. So in the end, I got something. But when you fail in an experience, it's very disheartening, and you convey nothing.
And it's a way, I think in some ways, most cooking is failure to replicate. That becomes your thing.
Yes.
My mother, when she first got married into the family, she had to take care of a huge family, and she didn't know how to cook.
Yes.
And she tried to mimic what her mother-in-law was trying to teach her, failed to do that, and that became her script. And now, for me, failing to cook my mother's cooking is now my cooking.
Yes.
Okay? So in some ways, that failure itself is a site of creativity in some ways.
Right.
Fantastic.
Right.
So Asma, I'm going to kind of, a very similar question to you in terms of, for you also is this the chef's table experience, okay? Between your cooking and your writing and in front of the camera, okay? So some of the kind of challenges in these three things and how they're different or how they're similar to each other.
I think my experience is very different, because for me, I don't see anything different in all three, and I'm just trying to. So even the cookbook I wrote, for those who may have seen it, there are lots of stories about my parents, my childhood. At the last 2 pages of my cookbook, I'd left to write a dedication to my mother. But as I was finishing the cookbook, our old family cook, Haji Saab, passed away, who had fed me since I was a baby. And I wrote a dedication to him. I called the chapter Alvida Haji Saab. So the thing is that, in front of the camera as well, with Chef's Table, they saw the draft of my cookbook about this paratha episode. And I was just trying to describe it, and it's there in the film. So for me, I think I'm in a slightly unusual position because all my worlds merge together. My cooking, my speaking, storytelling. Because also when unlike a lot of chefs in restaurants, those who come and eat in my restaurant will know that I will serve your table and I will clean your plates. So I'm having a conversation with you still. And, so on Chef's Table, that was actually live. I couldn't cancel those bookings. Those people were ready to kill me. I couldn't tell them also why. Because I said Chef's Table, they tell the whole world. So I had to let the guests come and tell them when they were there. So I've never ever seen, because for me, this is just how it is. I've always, whether there's a camera there or not, whether I'm writing, so even when I'm writing, I actually just dictated it out to my child because he had to help me write the recipes. Because if I had to measure anything, everything was a disaster. Because I cannot. I measure with my eyes and my hands. So he measured everything from my hands. He said, Amma, put this in the scale. Amma, just give it to me. I'll put the teaspoon. The recipes all work, not because I wrote them, he measured them, because I have to be barefoot. I stand barefoot and I cook. Because for me, if I have to think, I cannot cook. If I have to think, if you give me 2 lines to read right now, everybody will be here till night because I'll fluff it. And one camera team knows this. I was in a refugee camp, I had to say 2 lines about an aid agency. It took us 35 takes. They all went mad. I could have this whole conversation without any problem. So yeah, for me, it's all the same.
Just as a footnote, the kid who wrote the recipes,
yeah.
Is it the same kid who complained about you cooking?
Yes.
Is that you? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so he may have regretted that. But he is someone who actually, if he cooks, he will be a better cook than me and Ammo. His understanding of spices, his palate is incredible. I made a biryani once where I forgot one touch of an ingredient. The Jaffrey, I just put a little bit. And in that, where there's 15 kgs of rice, he told me, Amma, you didn't put the Jaffrey. That blew me. Then when he wrote my recipes, I said, I know you're going to get everything right because he understood. And this is the great thing when a child grows up in the kitchen with you. That touch of spice, he understands that intuitively. And so, yeah, that's why the recipes, I have people who've never had risala making risala, and I think, yeah, I know why, because that kid was measuring like his life depended on it.
That's fantastic. Beautiful story. Because I know my son just left to go to college, and he's just beginning to cook. And that kind of it's a fantastic experience, which is the levels of failure is fascinating. And his failure to cook is his source of inspiration and his aspiration to cook. This is his first semester in college. Chandrahas, you are coming in a sense, maybe slightly different, kind of more from writing primarily. And I have read your beautiful novel, which probably later in the day we will, I'll have a chance to quote. Especially, I was telling Chandrahas, midway through his novel, on his, I think, what's called My Golden...
Days of My China Dragon.
Days of My China Dragon. It was kind of fascinating where the narrator for the first time cooks fried rice. Maybe if we have enough time, we'll come back to that question. To open it up again for you, in terms of the art of writing and the art of cooking, what do you see as kind of analogic? What do you see as quite different things? And in some ways, for her, they're congruent. For her, they're in some ways divergent. For you, divergent or congruent?
Well, I think everybody has a map, a private map of how they're divergent, how they're congruent. It's in adding those together that you get a very full sense of this world. I remember 15 years ago, I gave up my first job. I've been retired ever since. And I thought I'm going to work from home. And actually, when you think about it, writing and cooking are 2 things you do mainly at home. They're both very domestic activities, which can become social, but they're not necessarily so. And as I was going home, I stopped at a bookshop, and for the first time, instead of going to novels, I went to the cookbook section and said, well, since I'm going to be home, I might as well learn how to make lunch for myself. which I'm ashamed to say at that age, at 25, I didn't really cook very much at the time.
It's the same shameful confession of all South Asian men.
But there
of
can be
middle
good things
class.
about coming to something late. And it took me, I was much more invested at the time in writing than cooking, so it took me much longer to cook decently than to write decently. But in terms of the basic difference, to just begin at the level of the physical, I think unless you are a very unusual writer, you always write sitting down. Unless you are a very unusual cook, you always cook standing up.
Fantastic.
And in a way, these are the two postures of life, isn't it? So a dialogue between them in the course of a day is something that gives, both sides give meaning to each other. And
That's brilliant.
and both are things you do with your hands, but they're divided, strangely enough, into intellectual work on the one side and physical work on the other. And somehow in our society, and especially if you're a man, you are sort of taught that if you do one, you generally don't do the other. In a way, it could almost be a shorthand for the caste system, that if you learn how to write, then you shouldn't cook. If you know how to cook, there's no question of you needing or even wanting to come close to writing. So when we as Indians today, I think, do both, then in a way we are erasing some of the invisible borders and boundaries of the past. And I think the final point I want to make is both cooking and writing are kinds of the acts of self-expression at their best. You know, everybody cooks in a very individual way once you know a dish. The acts of self-expression, both writing and cooking, which at one level, in their highest form, can become acts of hospitality. Writing a novel, in a way, it can be seen as something very inward, but in a way, you want to reconstruct a map of the world so that people who come in see inside the world of the book folk who otherwise they would not be seen in relationship with one another. So in a way, in writing a novel, you make a map of your society. And in cooking, it's very dull to cook only for yourself. And the real pleasure of cooking is in what cooking does when people can be brought to eat your food and what they reveal of themselves in doing so. And for me, that is the real pleasure of cooking. And I had a very good school in this, which was the restaurant I used to live above.
That's beautiful. In fact, this is a perfect segue, Asma, to your experience, which was quite exceptional, which I read and saw on your program, which is you decided to run a home-style kitchen exclusively with women. So, which is quite exceptional in a restaurant business, which is kind of funny, which is domestic cooking, the burden. I think Oxfam just did a study where 12.5 billion hours per day of care work is done by women globally and unpaid for. Okay? So when it is unpaid for, it is gendered in a particular way. When it is paid for, say New York, a high society, haute cuisine world, there is a world in which it is mostly masculine, right? So you run a restaurant with why did you make that decision and how did you make that decision? B, what you're learning from it, that experience of running female-led and managed and worked kitchen.
I mean, it's very easy now for me to say that this is what I planned. I could justify this all-female kitchen, but wasn't that. I needed to work with people who intuitively understood what I was doing. Women who had learned to cook by andas, where nobody asked you the weight of something, how long will this be, just watching. And this kind of, even I had not realized, and this is the pity of it, that even I did not value the skills of a home cook till I saw someone else watching the size of the aloo I was cutting for the aloo katli. This is a Aligarh specialty with the rogni roti. That the potato has to be cut thin, but there's a perfect slice that has to be cut. Because if it's too thin, it will disintegrate. If it's too fat, it will not cook. And each one has to be the same size. Here there was this Dadi and Nani. She has, mashallah, 8 grandchildren. She watched me cut 2 slices. And she said, "Main karungi." And everyone was perfect. And I watched in awe, and I realized then, my God, look at her. And yet she was telling me that my dal was going to overflow. So her eyes were everywhere, And I was thinking, this is a quality that I had not recognized women have. And so it was just like literally, I don't know whether I chose them, they chose me. And we started doing the supper clubs together. And I did try to hire men. They didn't even last for 1 hour. And one guy came with so many knives, I had to let him go because he arrived with all this. He opened out his tools and I said, "Tum jao," because I mean, what is he going to do with all these knives? Like massive, like Kill Bill kind of sword. It kind of it intimidated me, and I was thinking, you don't need all this. And so it was this comfort zone. And the thing is that we sang. And the first time we cooked a supper club, I was the one cooking alone. They were doing all the prep. 90% of our work is prep.
I see.
So
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me to say I made the biryani is a bit like much, because all the washing of the rice, which is the most painful thing, peeling the potatoes, everything they were doing. But when we started putting on the biryani, and I am from a Muslim culture, and ironically all the women who are in my team are all Hindus. When I put the biryani on and I said Bismillah, they all said Bismillah. And that day I realized that in that kitchen, in that moment, all the walls and barriers that a society like this puts between us had gone. And
That's
this
magical.
This is the thing that 3 of the women are very strict vegetarians, but for them they said our religion is this kitchen, and we had to work on Diwali because something happened. And I said that you can't work on Diwali. They said we don't need to go to any mandir. For us, we have come to the mandir here. And that kind of, it is so humbling. You feel so small when you hear women speak like this, because for them, this is liberty. They were ayahs and nurses and cleaners in hospitals. For them, they suddenly came to the space, and they came. I would bring them out after every supper club, and this audience of mainly white people stood up and clapped. They wept because for them, I paid them. This idea, this unpaid labor, but unrecognized, unsung heroes, the nobodies of the world who cooked behind the walls. We didn't even sit and watch the people eat the roti, the perfect roti we made. This is our culture. This is where we came from. And I realized one thing, this is my calling. I want to cook, but I want to free. I want to lift the image of a home cook, not just my image. In my face, and even though it's my face in Netflix, I am the face of a movement. I'm every woman no one recognized as a good cook. So yeah, for me it is really a passion, and I'm driven by that.
It's beautiful. And kind of a segue, Ms. Jaffrey. In your natal household, you write in the Climbing the Mango Tree that I think most of the cooks were men. And was that true? Is that most of the cooks were men? And in a sense, from your point of view, having looked at this from the other side of it, how did you come to cooking, and what was the process, and in terms of relationship of gender and class that played out in this transformation from their cooking and your omnivorousness? And I was just rereading Climbing the Mango Tree. The menus in that book is kind of fascinating, and part of it so one question is about gender and this kind of skill and cooking that Asma is talking about. You also credit your Madhur Kayast upbringing to a kind of an omnivorousness, a kind of an in-betweenness of lots of traditions. Okay, so could you tell us a little about how that has shaped your palate and your appetite and your cooking in terms of gender and your kind of a location that you came out of in that caste background too?
There are so many questions
Yes.
in there. I don't know if I can remember all of them. But the first thing I wanted to say is that in my case, there is no instinctive woman knowing exactly what to do. I knew nothing. And I grew up in a household where there were cooks. They were generally male cooks. My grandmother in one case and my mother in other cases did go in to supervise this and that, but they didn't cook. And I didn't have a sense of what you're talking about, this natural, instinctive andaz of getting everything right and by proportion. I didn't know any of that. So when I started cooking, I wanted what my mother could barely provide because she could cook by andaz, but I had not been introduced to andaz. So it depends on what kind of family you're from. So I wasn't this instinctively ready woman who just would cook by instinct and get it right. I just could not do that. So the other way for me was to measure. And as you would say, I would watch when people say, how do you learn how to cook? How do you write a recipe? I would say by watching. I learn nothing. People can write me a recipe and give it to me. I'm not going to understand it because I don't know how high the fire is. What are they doing? Is they cooking on low, semi-low, medium? It makes such a difference. What kind of pan is it? Are they using a flat pan or this high pan? How much oil is in the pan? I have to watch them make it. And as I see, how are they cutting the vegetables? I need to see with my eyes, and then I can make the dish that tastes like that. Because all these variables are very important to somebody who doesn't know, who has no instinct, because she wasn't raised in a kitchen. And I was not raised in a kitchen. So when I started cooking, and I still do that, and if I'm writing a cookbook, I have my ruler, I have a pencil, I have a paper, and I'm measuring each thing. I want my readers to get it right and get it as good as I can make it. I think that's my job. If I don't let my reader cook from my book as well as I'm cooking it, then I have failed. So I measure absolutely accurately. I give the size of the pan. I say how high the fire is. And when I used to teach students, and we were frying onions, and they would be afraid that the onion is getting too brown, I said, no, this is Indian food. Cook it. Keep cooking it. Don't be afraid. Keep frying. No, 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 not the right color yet. It needs to be browner. It needs to be crisper. And these are things that I learned and I try to put in my books. So whoever's cooking from my book is not going to fail. That's a very important thing for me. And andaz doesn't work for me. I can cook now. If I'm just cooking for my family, I'll throw things. My husband always says to me, okay, write it down, because I don't want to see this dish today and then it's disappeared. It's gone forever. I'll never have it again. And I like it so much, but you don't write it down. So I said, okay, you write it down. I'll just tell you. Because I want it to be correct. I want it to be right. I want it to taste as good as I can get when I make it well. So these things are very important to me, and they don't come to everybody by instinct. I do cook by andaz now that I've been cooking for 50 years. Which andaz, for those of you who don't know, is by
approximation.
Approximation. You need to have a sense of how much you should put. I have a sense now, but I've learned it over 50 years. I wasn't there in the kitchen as a toddler watching my mother cook. And so there are many, I feel my readers are like that. They don't know. They weren't with me or my mother or with my servant, my cook who was there. So I have to teach them. It's my responsibility, and I take that responsibility very seriously.
Excellent.
And what were your 100 other questions?
No, that was the other one was cast. This is fine. This was terrific. Because I was going to, in fact, ask you, and then we'll go around maybe one more time before we open up for questions, is from your perch.
Yes.
It looks like Indian food writing is reaching a threshold. And what does it look like to you in terms of writing about food by Indians in India, by Indians globally? What's your sense
Well, I can tell you more about America.
Good.
I love young people who are coming up and beginning to write about Indian food, and especially those who are talented writers. I just find them very exciting, knowing somebody's going to replace us when we are gone. My generation is gone. And there's a young girl, for example, Tejal Rao, who is writing for the New York Times. I find her work very interesting because she's got a new take. and she's cooking what Americans might like more and how she eats. And there's another one called Priya Krishna. And what Priya does, she's written a book called Indianish. And it's not a pure Indian cookbook. It's a mixture of, you know, the Mexican way of cooking, the making a quick tacos with Indian stuff inside it. It is how people eat in America. They snack. They don't eat the sit-down meals, big proper meals. They snack more than anything else. And they are writing for this new generation, and I find it very interesting. I can't write like that because I don't eat like that. I said, give me my proper meal. Where's the khana? Where's the food? I want to eat from, you know, all the things that I expect on the plate. I don't nibble. I eat my meal. I eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, however small they may be. But this new way of eating in America, snacking on little things through the course of the day, I don't do, but the young people are doing it. And I find the young writers are working to satisfy the customer, as it were.
Excellent. So I'll now move to Chandrahas. In your novel, Days of My China Dragon, about, as I said, halfway through it, the protagonist is forced to cook fried rice for the first time because the chef is away. And he burns the ingredients on the first try. He had no andaz, obviously, and in fact, it was with onion and garlic, especially. And he's unable to manage the simultaneity of high heat and fragile ingredients. I mean, that's, of course, what cooking is working with heat and acid, or working on organic material. So it will always have a tendency to go wrong. Eventually, he's successful and discovers that, and I quote Chandrahas back to him, and for the audience here, the divide between the self and the world vanishes, where the spirit within each thing becomes manifest, where all action becomes unhurried and effortless like flowing water, which is what you get to eventually and what you get with andaz and cooking. So no more an abstract concept, but a new note in my, what he calls, stir-frying soul. The eternal, the all-encompassing Tao, end of quote. So for me, the question is, so what is the moment you recognize that first time in your life? And in a sense, and when and where did the kitchen become a space like that for you? These are not separate questions, same question. And what were the frictional moments in that flow, right? Because you're coming, and this is the reverse picture about gender, about class, and entering that space that you nicely gestured to at the beginning. So the question is, how did that come about? A little more specification.
I remember the first successful morsel of food that I ever cooked was followed instantly by great pain. Because my mother was sitting in the audience, was away on tour, and I said, you know, why don't I buy some fish from the market? And when she comes home, there's a little fried fish already waiting, and this would be, be a surprise. And you get lots of brownie points. As a man, you can only cook one good meal a month, and you still are held in very great regard. So I met this, and the thing is, as an amateur cook, you never know whether it's fried to the right degree of crispiness or not. So you have to steal a bit from the fish that you want to present whole to the eater, and I tore off a little bit from the bottom, and I put it in my mouth, and I thought, this was really good. And the next thing I felt was a bone in my throat. And when my mother came home, she found not, this elegant meal set on a table, but like a man jumping up and down saying, how do I get this bone? I can't, no amount of drinking water can get it out. And then, so I had to take help from the eater. And she said, the thing to do, which we also know Christian does, Eastern fish-eating people, what you do is you take a little rice ball and you swallow it whole, so it takes the bone down with it. So I ate 7 or 8 of those, but still wouldn't disappear. And as all this was happening, my stomach was growing ever larger. And I suddenly had a completely different silhouette and profile from what I had ever before or since. And finally it went down, by the time I'd long forgotten that I cooked a fish. It was all gone and it was cold, and it went down to the eater. And that's when I got a sense of how each meal, even the same meal, the same dal cooked 100 times, always has a certain drama attached to it in this case. This is very extreme, but it doesn't always have to be like that. But I had the great good luck after that, a few years later, when I had my first ever house to myself. When I went down, I saw there's a restaurant downstairs. And I've never liked writing at home. And from the very beginning, when I passed this restaurant, it's a Chinese restaurant. The great modern dish of England is chicken tikka masala. The great modern dish of India is chow mein or chili chicken.
Yeah.
And everybody used to pour in to eat, and the chef, the waiters, and the proprietor between them had hundreds of food stories. And every time there was no customers or after hours, we'd all sit together to chat. And I found that food brought out a side of myself and of Bombay that I had not seen before. And Bombay, I think of them as extremely tough, wiry, rugged people who show not an ounce of fragility. But even all these folks, sometimes you have to have a meal somewhere when you're out, and they come and sit down. And for that one instant, when a waiter hovered above your table saying, "Shall I serve you?" there's a change in the expression of your eyes when someone serves food for you, isn't it? I think that is the best moment in cooking. To cook only for yourself without cooking for others is to waste the entire arsenal of what you can do with a good meal. And from all these elements, I began to think I can never be a food writer in that strict sense of writing recipes or even having a very deep or intuitive view of a cuisine. But I can be a food writer in the sense of showing what food does to human beings of different kinds, both at the level of cooking, at the level of chefs, waiters, and proprietors, and at the level of eating, at the level of customers who come with a certain need. Sometimes you come to a restaurant, you don't care what they put in front of you. You just want to be of yourself, or you want to look at other faces eating. You don't eat alone. And all these little moments, I began to think, in that, and as I wrote, I began to feel this is a good theme, because without knowing it, it's only when you write you realize that a restaurant is one of the great theaters, both of food and of life. And all these hidden resonances, feelings that pass between faces in a restaurant and between labor and customers are the things you live for. I mean, in a way, it's a model of all the things you can get out of life, you can get in a restaurant.
Fantastic. In fact, I'm going to end with this question. We have about 2 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions from you. In his novel, the narrator, in fact, poses the question, why eat at a restaurant? And one of the answers he speculates is this: to eat with somebody one cannot eat with at home, end quote. Which probably is kind of I personally found it a very pregnant kind of a suggestion. So, kind of, Asma, in a sense, the question is, why eat at a restaurant? Why eat at your restaurant? What are your customers looking for?
I think I can quote from an anonymous note that someone left on the pass, and I have no idea, even from looking at the handwriting, who it was. It was a very busy service. He said, "I left this place yearning for a place that I had forgotten existed, and now I yearn to go there." That is what my restaurant does. It takes you home. Because what you recognize, you don't need to be South Asian. You look up and you see 9 women. The average age of the woman cooking is 50. I'm 52. And we're all of us are in our 50s, and we cook. And I think that irrespective of your culture, everybody says, if my grandmom was Indian, this is exactly how she'd cook. We hear this all the time. This whole idea of someone who cooked with love, you taste it. And this is why you need to come to my restaurant.
I will. Okay, that's a lovely note to end this. This is beautiful. Let's open it up to some questions from you and some comments. Yes. Do you get the microphone? Perfect.
Hi, I have a question for Madhur and also for yourself, Krishnendu. You were saying how you were very purist about the word curry, and I guess my question kind of leads towards your theory of, Krishnendu's theory of hierarchy of cultural taste. So are there any existing frustrations when it comes to when people either talk about your food or what you think is your food, and when it comes to cultural appropriation? And basically, are you still frustrated with any other terms in cooking?
Other than curry?
Yes.
Other than curry?
I've just learned to swallow it and just leave it alone, because I don't want to struggle with it. I think people have a certain association of Indian food and whether they understand the word curry and the 10 meanings it could have. and the variety that exists within India. I just want them to know that the variety is so endless as you go from north to south, east to west, that you are insulting Indian food a little bit by calling it curry. But if you want to, go ahead. I'm too old. I just don't care. I just don't care. You call it what you want. I want to give you the variety. I want to show you how great Indian food is. What magnificent things we can make with one spice or two spices or three spices. And call it what you want. If you're happy with the dish, eat it and enjoy.
Yeah, a quick just response is what you call hierarchy of taste correctly. In New York City, for instance, even now, most Americans are not willing to pay for the kind of money it would need to pay for a good, sustainable, skilled chef, with some exceptions, as you see here on this panel. Not in New York, of course. In London, I think London is far ahead of that in terms of my price analysis shows that, in fact, in New York City, only 2%. There are 400 Indian restaurants in New York City, out of which only 2% can charge fees that are at the level of French restaurants and Italian restaurants. Now Korean and some Chinese are breaking into it. I would say in London, when I did the analysis of Yelp data, it shows that in London, the position of Indian restaurants in the London market is analogous to Italian restaurants in New York City. It's much wider, a much wider range, much more interesting food, and much better willingness to pay a price for it. So interesting question, and would be nice to do that, replicate that analysis to every city and see what does in terms of hierarchy of taste. Good. Any other comments, questions? Yeah.
My compliments to all the panelists. It was a wonderful session, listening about food, cooking, and literature all mixed together. I don't have any questions, but I'm thankful to Mr. Rai, who was facilitating the program, for his addition questions and comments. So I would just share 3-4 things about it, the program, and also what I have felt about cooking. One is, Madam Madhurji, I entirely agree. Curry is a very poor substitute for what we do in the kitchen, which is called sabji, tarkari, whatever it is. And then I come from Odisha, land of Lord Jagannath. Every day we offer 60 kinds of dishes that's being worshipped and cooked for centuries. So under the word curry, hundreds of dishes go. That is one. The other one is in Indian languages. I have lived in South India also. Mine was an All India service, and many of the South Indian cooking I picked up there. But a common word for kitchen, which we are forgetting and which is very meaningful, is called Lakshmi Sar. Means that part of the house where Goddess Lakshmi lives. So our health, well-being, and the opportunities, everything comes from the kitchen, from the mother's love and whatever it symbolizes. Then a small thing I would share, this is more for the younger generation. My maternal grandfather was a monk, and he had left his family, and then but occasionally he would visit us. He had not severe ties with us. Occasionally when he would visit us, he would cook for himself 2 dishes, rice and 1 curry, and that curry he would share with us. So one day when I was a child, I had asked him, why don't you cook what your daughter, that is my mother, cooks? Then he had explained it so beautifully that had stayed with me. That was, there is a brata, means a kind of spiritual penance, which is known as sopaka, means you cook your own food and share it with others. That itself is a spiritual practice. Then I come to my last point. I very much admired your question, what is similar between cooking and writing. Occasionally I write and regularly I cook. Sometimes regularly I write and occasionally I cook. And then I look at the similarities. This question always comes to my mind, that to me this is a beautiful thought. When we cook something, you take a little onion, little haldi, little ginger, like you said, by intuition or experience or learning, you go on adding. At the end of it, they all change colors, texture in front of you, the smell, and at the end it is a beautiful dish everybody enjoys. This is so also with writing. You add a chapter here, a word here, a sentence there, an experience there at the end. It's a beautiful thing for everybody to enjoy. Thank you for giving me this time.
Perfect. Yep.
Hello. Try and make this brief. Let's see. When I was maybe a late teenager, very young woman in my early 20s, I loved to cook. I was okay. I had some instinct. I wasn't a great cook, but I had some instinct. Then I had 3 children. I raised as a single mother, working full time, getting graduate degrees. And when my children became teenagers, I mean, that kitchen closed. Kitchen closed. I don't cook. And I'm just wondering if you have any sense. I mean, in America, in the US, only the wealthiest and maybe only if would have a cook. Not the middle class, you know. I'd love a cook. But I can nourish my. Do you think, now Chandrahas, I don't know how much you cook, or how much your writing interferes or not, or the leisure you have to cook. You don't have children yet, I don't know. But
Tell us your story. When do you plan to have children?
wait.
And whether you will cook when you have children?
No, but what I wonder is if you think someone, a woman in my kind of class position can cook in this way. I like to take time and cook with other people and not just.
I just want to tell you that it was probably people like, someone like you, a lot of my own friends who have different things. My cookbook, this is my first cookbook, has the first chapter is a feast for one. And I have written recipes where you cook for just one person. And throughout that, my aim is I chat to you throughout. I hold your hand, so while you cook, I'm talking to you. There's stories in that chapter. With every recipe, I tell you why it's so special. And it's a wholesome thing. And then there's also the last bit where, when there will be some leftovers, because obviously you can't cook.
Right.
I tell you a very exciting way to use it the next day. So I think that, do cook. There are lots of books available online, whatever. You don't have to get my book. But cook, because I think it is not just about food. It is about nourishing your soul.
Yeah, so you don't think that sense of I'm so busy, I have so many other things to do.
You should.
No, perfect. Yes, please. Let's get you the microphone.
I just have one short comment and appreciation, and that is for Jaffrey writing out everything so specifically, the size of the pot, the height of the pot, and all of that. Because when you're trying to cook a food from another group that's not your own food, I'm from Denmark, and we cook real boring food. Traditional Danish food is very simple. Takes no time to cook it, but it's simple. So when you venture out and want to cook something very tasty like Indian food, it's very good to have the blow by blow, step by step, because you don't know what the pot looks like. You know it in your own culture, your own cooking. You are very familiar with what you need to reach for, but I just wanted to say I appreciate that. If you can't go to the cooking class and see the show, occasionally I'll do it. It's very good when you can just read it and do it.
Fantastic. Yes.
I just have one simple, straightforward question to all the panelists. What is your take on fusion food?
For me, it's fusion confusion. I'm very old-fashioned, and I think the food that for me has to be rooted in my tradition, and I know it's very fashionable now, lots of people cook in restaurants. I think that, I want the food to be rooted and earthed and something that I can associate with, so I don't do it.
I think all food is fusion. There is no pure, there's nothing in the world that's pure. Look at our own food, look at Indian food. Where did we get some of these things? Masoor dal, Egypt. What are the sources of all our things? Chanas, they came through Afghanistan and they originated elsewhere. Carrots originated elsewhere, potatoes originated elsewhere, tomatoes originated elsewhere. A whole lot of cooking techniques with rice that we now often use are Persian. So when we say we are purists and we will only cook authentic Indian food, there is no such thing. Never has there been such a thing. Everyone's influenced by someone else. Even if you take the Kadhai, there's a lot of questions about where the wok originated. And according to anthropologists, the wok originated in India, 3000 or more BC, and it was used originally for boiling down milk to make it sweets for the gods. And then in some form or the other it went to China, but anthropologists have traced all this. So when we sit and say, I want pure this or that food, it does not exist. You look at American food, okay, don't look at American food, but there certainly is completely mixed up food. But let's look at Indian food that we think of as so pure. I can give you 20, not only ingredients, but techniques that come from elsewhere. Even today we are making Mangalorean gobi and Manchurian gobi. And why are we doing this? Because it's natural to do. You learn from other people, you copy, you first take a little bit of soy sauce, and then you take a little bit of spice that you never had in your country before. You take chickpeas, which you didn't have in your country before, and then you start mixing it with other things. And before you know it, it has become something else. I keep telling people, we must have hundreds of thousands of potato dishes in India, but the potato is not ours. And when we are fasting, on fasting days, we don't eat the potato. There are certain things we don't cook on fasting days. We don't eat so-called English vegetables. We don't eat cauliflower. We don't eat peas, because these are English. We call them English. They're not our vegetables. We eat bangan, we eat kaddu, we eat all kinds of other things. But it all keeps changing. Minute by minute, we are influenced by other countries. If you think of the samosa, I actually brought some poems and things like that, but there's no time to read them. But the initial samosa came from Baghdad. It's Baghdadi, and it originated in the courts of Baghdad, and it was recorded as a poem, how to make a samosa. It was called sambusak, and it was in the 10th century that a Baghdadi wrote a poem about how to make a samosa and how to eat it. They didn't put aloo and matar in it, potatoes and peas in the samosa. They put ground meat and cabbage in it. And what was the chutney, as it were? Mustard. They rolled it in mustard. So, and then the samosa traveled all along India. It went into Indonesia. It went all around the world, on the Asian side, in different forms. I've had it in Indonesia filled with fish. But that was the same sambusak, and the names for it are very similar all the way through. But think of it. If you said we are purists and I will not eat anything from anywhere else, the samosa will be gone. Would you live without a samosa? I wouldn't.
Lovely, thank you. That's the perfect note to end it on. We have 2 points of view on it. And thank you for being here, and thank you to the panelists. Let's give them a hand.